This video is brought to you by Skillshare. Lebanon has been in a state of permanent crisis since about 2019. In that time, its currency has collapsed, its GDP has halved, and prices have increased by something like 5,000%, pushing millions into poverty. It's hard to overstate quite how rapid Lebanon's decline has been. A few years before, the Lebanese economy was booming, and its ascendant financial service industry earned it the nickname the Switzerland of the Middle East. The World Bank has suggested it might be the third worst economic crisis in history, after only the 1926 Chilean debt crisis and the 1931 Spanish Civil War. And things don't look like they're going to get any better anytime soon. So in this video, we'll briefly explain the history behind Lebanon's crisis, the country's decline post-2019, and why Lebanon really can't afford a war with Israel. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So we're going to split this video into three parts: pre-1990, 1990 to 2019, and 2019 until today. Let's start with pre-1990. Until the end of World War I, Lebanon was actually quite a lot smaller than it is today. Its predecessor, the Mount Lebanon Mutasarrifate, was about half the size, and its borders were deliberately designed by the Ottoman Empire to map onto the region's ethnic divisions. However, after World War I, when France and Britain divvied up the defeated Ottoman Empire for themselves, Lebanon was expanded, both because local Lebanese leaders feared that Lebanon wasn't self-sufficient after a famine wiped out half its population in the 1910s, and because France wanted a bigger territory under its direct control. Lebanon was expanded to include the city of Beirut, Bekaa Valley, and Muslim-majority territories in the north and south. This dramatically altered Lebanon's demographics. The Lebanese Sunni Muslim population increased eightfold, and the Shiite population increased fourfold. This meant that Maronite Christians, who had previously constituted a solid majority, now accounted for just over 50% of the population, and their lower birth rates meant that their share of the population was constantly falling. This created even more interethnic tensions as Muslims demanded better representation, and population statistics are now so controversial in Lebanon that there hasn't been an official census since 1932. Anyway, for most of the 20th century, Lebanon's politics were defined by constant feuding between Christians and Muslims, exacerbated by French efforts to preserve the Christians' political monopoly. This spiraled into a brutal civil war in 1975 between essentially Maronite Christian elites and a coalition of Muslim and leftist groups led by the Palestinian Liberation Organization, or PLO. The PLO had fled from Palestine into Jordan in the late 60s after the 1967 war with Israel, which ended with Israel occupying not just Palestine but also the Sinai Peninsula. But they fell out with the Jordanian authorities in the early 70s and fled to southern Lebanon. The Lebanese civil war is ridiculously complicated, so we're not going to go into it in too much detail now, but the TLDR is that the PLO coalition were winning against the Maronite Christians, and by 1977, Lebanon had become effectively partitioned, with the Christians ruling in the north and the Muslims in the south. The PLO's success encouraged both Israel and Syria to intervene, because Israel didn't want the PLO to expand, and Syria wanted to prop up the incumbent Maronite Christian government, with which it had good relations. The war finally ended in 1990, with the implementation of the TAIF agreement, which basically created a sectarian government where different ethnic groups were guaranteed representation. Relative stability allowed foreign aid and investment to flow into the country, and Lebanon's economy began to improve. Between just 1990 and 1991, Lebanon's GDP per capita increased by over 60%, and by the 2010s it was about $9,000, making it one of the wealthiest countries in the region. Now, that's not to say that things were smooth sailing. Syria still essentially occupied much of the north until 2005. Hezbollah were acting as a state within a state in the south, sectarian violence was widespread, inequality was rife, and regional instability, especially the Syrian civil wars, constantly threatened to overflow into Lebanon. Nonetheless, the fact that Lebanon maintained steady growth in an environment of such acute geopolitical turmoil is pretty impressive. So how did this happen? Well, Lebanon had a pretty strong tourism industry, and many well-educated Lebanese were sending significant remittances back home. But the main thing driving Lebanon's economy was finance. Opaque banking laws, a well-educated workforce, and in later years, the promise of high returns on dollar-denominated deposits made Lebanon the go-to place for Middle Eastern money, earning Lebanon the nickname the Switzerland of the Middle East. These foreign currency inflows allowed Lebanon to maintain its dollar peg, which basically kept the Lebanese pound overvalued, run massive deficits, and maintain a dangerously high debt-to-GDP ratio. However, in a desperate attempt to keep money coming in when inflows started drying up in the early 2010s, the Lebanese central bank began offering remarkable interest rates, above 10%, for new dollar deposits, way higher than anywhere else in the world. This began what the World Bank has described as a national Ponzi scheme, where Lebanese banks used new dollars to pay interest on old dollars and maintain its dollar peg. This all started collapsing in 2018, when there weren't enough new dollars coming in, and the Lebanese central bank had to start burning through its foreign currency reserves. This spooked investors, who started pulling their money out, and in late 2019, Lebanon essentially ran out of dollars. To stabilise the economy, the government proposed a series of regressive taxes on gasoline, tobacco, and WhatsApp messages, prompting massive riots and political stasis. Things weren't helped by the sectarian government, which contributed to legislative paralysis and created a crony class of political elites who knew they couldn't really be voted out. By early 2020, the Lebanese pound had lost 75% of its value, GDP had contracted by 20%, and debt servicing alone consumed nearly half of government revenue. By now, Lebanon's economy was already in crisis, but it was then rocked by a series of events that turned a crisis into a catastrophe. In mid-2020, the pandemic hit, but Lebanon's government didn't have anywhere near enough fiscal space to keep the economy afloat. In August 2020, an enormous explosion in the port of Beirut, which was previously responsible for 60% of Lebanon's imports, killed at least 218 people and caused billions of dollars in damage. Putin's invasion of Ukraine made things even worse, because Lebanon imports all its fuel and had previously imported over 25% of its total calories consumed from Russia or Ukraine. In 2023, higher interest rates exacerbated Lebanon's debt crisis, and today the country looks unlikely to ever recover. Lebanese politics is still deadlocked, even after last year's elections. Inflation is above 200%, and 4 in 5 Lebanese live below the poverty line. Clearly, Lebanon can't afford a war between Israel and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. But in a cruel paradox, it's Lebanon's lack of state capacity, eroded by years of political and economic crisis, which means no one can stop Hezbollah if they decide to get involved. A few weeks ago, we told you that we were making a physical newspaper. But it turns out that designing a newspaper isn't all that easy. So we headed to Skillshare to take their course on the topic. Unlike when Jack tried to learn InDesign for another never-released project a few years ago, this time he was guided through the process quickly and efficiently. And this time the project will actually see the light of day thanks to Skillshare's incredibly easy-to-follow guides. In fact, here's an exclusive little preview of what we've been working on. It's not just that either. You likely already knew Skillshare for classes and things like photography, editing and illustration. But did you know that Skillshare also has hundreds of career-focused classes too? That's courses on everything from how to start a business to maximising your workflow or how to grow in e-commerce. Another course that Jack's taking to help him with the newspaper. And if you use our link, then you can get access to all of that for free. That's right, the first 500 people to use our link will get access to one of Skillshare's best offers. 30 days free and 40% off your first year of Skillshare membership. That's the best Skillshare offer we've ever had, so make sure you click our link in the description. Thanks for your support, and to Skillshare for sponsoring this video.